So, why should you forgive yourself? And how do you actually go about doing that? So, welcome to today's episode of Super Aging, where my focus is on self forgiveness. I'm Marianne from One Life to Flourish. I'm a wellness mindset coach and an intuitive energetic healer with a focus on supporting people, particularly women at midlife, to discover their essential self by healing, releasing the past, and transforming the present so that they can actually have an empowered future. Now, in the last episode, I talked about basically forgiving others, and I talked about how important this is to actually be able to do, so forgiving other people as a way to heal yourself and then, kind of move on with your life. So, if you listen to that episode, then you would know that I talked quite a bit about how forgiveness was something that I struggled with for a very, very long time. So, I really was one of those people who felt that living with, the anger, the hurt, the resentment, the desire for revenge or whatever was better than just letting it go, because then the other person had won. Also, that seemed to me. So it's kind of interesting how we can get so caught up in our own thoughts and emotions that we really can't step back and see that we really are the only losers in that particular scenario. And I could not see that for a long, 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 long time. Now, I've definitely also had an issue with forgiving myself. And probably forgiving yourself it's definitely more difficult, I think, than forgiving others, or it was for me. But by the same, idea, it's actually much more important to forgive yourself. Because basically, if we can't forgive ourselves for past mistakes, it then becomes almost impossible to actually really accept and love ourselves. And this is the important part of growing and moving forward in life. So it is very important. And of course, there are other negative impacts if we stay stuck in the past, kind of dwelling in our negative emotions. So that has an obvious impact on our physical, emotional, and mental health. But, most importantly, we just end up with a really, really unhealthy view of who we actually are. We don't see ourselves in a positive way. And this is not a good thing. It basically has an impact on us, not just at that physical and emotional level, but kind of right deep in our soul, sort of at that spiritual level. So there's a few things that happen when we don't forgive ourselves. And as I've already expressed, I do know a little bit about this. So forgiveness, whether it's for yourself or for others, really ends up having a big impact. So let me just kind of explain a little bit about my process of it. So, as I said, it was one of my big struggles. And I've only just really come in the last couple of years to address this issue myself, because basically somewhere along the way, I took on the belief that I suppose if I didn't please other people, then there was something wrong with me. So I was kind of really caught up in this whole people pleasing sort of idea. Now, most often the things that we need to forgive ourselves involved how our actions impacted on someone else, or how we perceive them as impacting on someone else. So because I was wrapped up in trying to please others, I found it impossible to get over the fact that I'd let someone down, that I'd, basically spoken in the wrong way, done something that hurt them or whatever. It's sort of just stretched on and on and on, and I never let go of it. So because I didn't let these negative events and obviously the emotions tied into them go, and I'd kind of cycle through them, it was kind of almost like a little loop, I basically ended up keeping my nervous system on constant high alert. So, this kind of thinking where you're just constantly diving into that negative thought process basically triggers our fight or flight response, and then has like a flow-on effect to many other health impacts. So obviously on your nervous system, on your hormonal system, because part of the fight or flight response is tied into your hormones, your cardiovascular system, your immune system, and so on. So it has quite a big impact. And I was kind of starting to feel the physical impacts by the time I got to the point of really starting to make some changes. So because I was constantly bringing these events and emotions into my consciousness, it meant that it was having a big impact on me mentally and emotionally. So mentally, I was basically bashing myself up for being a bad person. And this just kind of created another loop where it was just impacting on negative feelings constantly. It just kept me trapped in the past. And, essentially, I really couldn't move forward. I was basically blind to, seeing how I could create a more positive future, I suppose. I wasn't learning any of the lessons that I needed to be learning. I was just kind of spinning my wheels, essentially. So I have to confess, I accidentally fell into making this change. So basically, I reached the point in my life where I realized that I just had to change. I had to become a physically and emotionally well person so that I could actually enjoy my life, live a much longer life in a much better way. That was essentially my starting point. So obviously this was looking at, what kinds of things I was eating, how much I was drinking, water, how much exercise I was doing, which was none. So I changed all of those things. And I also started to meditate daily. So it was kind of like food, exercise, meditation. And the meditation, as well as the other things, was kind of almost like a switch where it started to change my perceptions of myself from being very negative to being a little bit more balanced. So this was kind of the start of it, because I was so caught up in seeing myself in a really negative way that I just couldn't get past all of those experiences. And I kind of almost enjoyed, for want of a better term, just stewing in, my unforgiveness of myself and all the other stuff that, I felt was terrible. The next thing that happened was that I actually started to bring into my life a gratefulness practice that I did every single day. And this was a really positive thing for me. It was probably one of the biggest changes in my mindset out of everything that I did. So, and the interesting thing was that as I started to look at gratitude, in some of the stuff that I was reading, it would keep on talking about the importance of forgiveness and self-forgiveness. So I sort of started to go, oh, okay, forgiveness sounds important. Maybe I need to investigate it. And then I'd kind of go back into my little cycle. No, can't go there, But eventually, enough of these changes happened so that I was ready to look at forgiving other people. First of all, that was where I kind of started with the whole forgiveness thing. And I started small, just kind of basically doing what I could. And then I moved on to realizing that I actually needed to forgive myself for stuff that had happened in the past. I mean, I was holding on to stuff from, I don't know, decades ago. It wasn't an easy process. It's not an easy process to practice forgiveness and self-forgiveness if you're actually going to be genuine about it. So basically, my process went something like this. So I'd kind of recall a specific event, like it had just kind of come into my mind. Remember, I'm on a loop. And when that popped into my mind and I'd built up that self-awareness, then I kind of tried to step back from it a bit and just look at it almost as an observer, sort of going, what am I feeling about that? Where am I feeling it? What impact is it having on me? Now, I have to be honest that at this point, doing like timeline therapy, hypnotherapy, those kinds of things that I now practice myself, they were invaluable in actually helping me to release some of the emotions behind this, idea of forgiveness and self-forgiveness. So, I really had a lot of anger and hurt and shame that I needed to release. And doing it using timeline therapy in particular made the whole process a little bit easier and probably a little bit quicker. But anyway, I still had to, treat it as an observer, accept, this is what I'd done, accept my actions. And what I discovered by being an observer to the whole thing was that I'd basically been making excuses as well. So, it was uncomfortable to deal with the emotions. So it was much easier to kind of put these layers of excuses on top of it. And that stopped me from acknowledging that, I had made choices. I had a part to play in the whole thing. And it was important that I actually accepted my actions, but not in a way of, like driving in the guilt and that kind of thing, sort of acceptance rather than, sort of pounding it in like I had been. I hope that makes sense. So basically that allowed me to step out of this replay loop that I was constantly on. Now, as stuff came up, if it was possible, I actually started to apologize to people that had been affected by my actions. Now, this wasn't possible in a lot of cases because I've lived in lots of different areas, and it wasn't always possible for me to get in contact with some of these people. So if I couldn't contact them, I actually wrote out a letter to them of apology. And the other thing I did was I really went to journaling. And this was separate to my gratitude journaling. So I would journal about the actual situation, focusing on, how I could let it go and forgive myself, and reflecting on the whole thing. It was, super powerful and super important in my process. Obviously, everyone's going to do it a little bit differently. So, and also as part of the journaling, I started to look for the lessons to learn. So what could I learn from this situation? What was I meant to learn at the time? What could I learn now, and then be able to let it go? So that was probably the main part of what I did. So I kind of thought about the event, thought about my actions, the emotions, and tried to learn something from it, and then to just accept that, basically I am a human being, which means that I am going to make mistakes. I'm not perfect. And, sometimes it's hard to accept that you're not perfect. You might be able to forgive other people and go, oh yes, that's okay. I know we're not perfect, but it's really hard within ourselves. And basically this was like my healing process. Now, this process is still ongoing because there's stuff that I haven't realized buried in my unconscious that it's still coming up. When I'm triggered by some things, it's because of this fact that I haven't let stuff go still, and I'm triggered by it. And thankfully now I have a process for being able to, have awareness, not right in the moment, sometimes in the moment, where I kind of step back and go, oh, okay, that's interesting that I've responded to that particular situation in this way. What's that connected to? What can I learn about it? So that's totally different to when I was just deep diving into the emotion and just kind of allowing myself to swim on it and, whatever, just letting it take over. So this is just a process that you can try. Find the things that can work for you, but don't allow it just to keep on going. So, it's the other part of that is making sure that we treat ourselves with a high level of compassion. We are human. We do need to forgive ourselves. We need to be kind to ourselves. We need to accept that we have made mistakes in the past. We need to accept that we're going to make mistakes in the future. And that is okay. It's through doing that we can actually learn and grow. All right, so I hope that will be helpful. It is a tough and tricky subject. So if you feel that you do need some support to work through the emotions involved in either forgiving others or yourself, as I said, this is why I've actually trained up in doing hypnosis, in doing NLP, and in doing timeline therapy, because I use that then in my coaching. So if you'd like some details about how I could help you with that, you can just put yes in the comments, or you can just message me directly. So my details are in the comments there. All right. Now, what does all of this have to do then with super aging? Why am I connecting it to this? Well, if you've been following the show, you'll know that I often talk about the impact of negative emotions on our bodies, on our ability to self-heal, to do all of those kinds of things. So when we are not forgiving, we are building up a whole lot of negative emotions that have a massive impact on us. And we basically have much better physical, emotional, and mental health when we can forgive. That's essentially it. And if we've got, that much better, healthier way of living our lives, then it gives us the possibility of being able to age well. All right. Studies, because I like to go to studies, have shown that a process of genuine self-forgiveness promotes a more positive view of yourself and how you interact with others. And research has shown that both of these are really, really important in healthy aging. So there's lots of different facets to it. It really is something to consider being a forgiving person. It doesn't make you weak. It actually makes you strong. It makes you empowered. So that is where I'm going to leave it for this week. So please join me again next week, probably at this time. I think this time is working for me. So keep an eye out. At the moment, I'm not sure what I'm going to talk about. Often there's something that I will have pop up during the week that go, okay, I think I'd like to talk about that. So please have a great week. Please have a positive week where you're kind to yourself and you remind yourself that you are an imperfect human and that is okay. All right. Goodbye.